What's up, guys? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. Today we are talking the XFL. We're looking at the DC Defenders. We're going to do an XFL Fantasy Football 2020 player rankings and offensive breakdown of the DC Defenders. I'm not going to waste any time. We'll get right into it. Alright, so I'm super excited for this today, guys. We're looking at the DC Defenders. Going to be breaking down all the offensive fantasy relevant players for the DC Defenders, and honestly just looking at all of the teams on paper. The DC Defenders are by far the most talented team. I think that assuming everything goes well and they avoid the injury bug, the DC Defenders should be the best team in the XFL, which means there's going to be a lot of fantasy options out there. You want good players on good teams, and I think this is a team you're going to look to invest in heavily when you're drafting. So looking real quick at the head coach, Pep Hamilton. If you guys recall, he used to be the offensive coordinator of both Stanford and the Indianapolis Colts. He followed Andrew Luck for a good portion of his career. Hasn't really done too much since then, but now he's here in DC coaching the Defenders, and I think that he's going to be able to do a pretty good job in this league. Has a pretty creative offensive mind, which is really good considering the offensive assets that the Defenders have. But we'll begin with the quarterbacks. I think the Defenders got one of the best quarterbacks in the XFL in Cardale Jones. Cardale Jones is one of, if not the most athletic quarterbacks in this league. Has arguably the strongest wide receiver core, has two phenomenal running backs, and has a really good tight end. Again, just this team is stacked in terms of the XFL all the way around. I think the only downside is the fact that TC also looks like they have a pretty stacked defense, so they might not need to rely on Jones to have to win many shootouts, which could lower his upside on a week-by-week basis. But however, I just want good players on good teams. I think that Cardale Jones is a good player for the XFL, and I think DC will be the best team. So I think Cardale Jones is the number one fantasy quarterback in the XFL, will be a tier 1 guy, and we'll get into strategy later, just talking about when you need to be drafting quarterbacks, but definitely someone you want to keep an eye out for. His backup is Tyree Jackson, and honestly, if Cardale Jones goes down, I think Tyree becomes an immediate pickup, someone you want to keep on your radar. He has just enough talent with the supporting cast around him. I think that Tyree Jackson would become an immediate impact player in the XFL if something happens to Jones. So definitely keep your radar out for him. All right, now let's go to the running backs. This is going to be a very interesting position to figure out in the XFL just due to the pass-heavy nature of the league. So if we look at the first running back here is Jarrell Presley. He was drafted with the 301. He's an athletic freak of a running back. He's incredibly well-rounded and performed very well in college, but never really had a chance to shine in the NFL. He got to play in the AAF last year and was actually the leading running back when the league went belly up. So we've seen even in recent history that Jarrell Presley can be dominant in these types of leagues, and I would expect more of that to continue. And again, playing on one of the strongest teams, they shouldn't have to abandon the run too often with a good defense on the other side. So Jarrell Presley could easily be argued as the best running back in the league. The only reason why I'm hesitant to take him as the number one overall is because he also has a really dominant second string running back here in Donnell Pumphrey. But before we get into that, I just want to remind you guys, if you are interested in playing fantasy football in the XFL, I have already provided and created rankings for you guys. If you want to click the link in the below or go to fantasyaddictionnetwork.com, you can download those. I will be updating those for you all the way up until the start of the season, so make sure you check that out. If you're going to play XFL fantasy football, it's going to be really important to at least know who the best players are on each team so you can crush it in your leagues. All right, but anyway, getting back to Donnell Pumphrey, he was the second running back that the Defenders drafted. Donnell Pumphrey was very dominant in college and also played a few games with the Philadelphia Eagles, but he's a great receiver out of the backfield. I think he had a season where he had over 2,000 combined yards in his senior year, so he's not going to get the same carry count as Presley, just due he has a smaller frame and he's just not as well rounded, at least in terms of athletic ability, as Presley. But because of his talent and his ability to play in the passing game, I think it definitely does limit Presley's upside on a week-by-week basis. That's, again, understand why I'm hesitant to take Presley with my number 1 pick, but I do think he's still going to be one of the elite receivers, and Pumphrey will be a decent flex in his own right. They also have Nick Brossette on their team. He's much bigger and slower than either Presley or Pumphrey, but just someone to monitor because he might end up being the touchdown vulture, which again could eat into Presley's overall fantasy usage and value, because if Presley ends up stealing the touchdowns, Brossette ends up stealing Presley's touchdowns, that could be very bad. But overall, I think that Presley is incredibly talented, and I think he'll do really well on a team that should do really well. Let's jump into the wide receivers. So just about a week ago, there was a trade between the Los Angeles Wildcats and the DC Defenders in which they traded Trey McBride for Rashad Ross straight up, which from anyone that's observing, there has to be a reason why this happens, and we don't fully know whether it's due to an injury or just a scheme fit, but Rashad Ross was drafted basically a whole round ahead of Trey McBride. Rashad Ross was the best wide receiver in the AAF, so basically the DC Defenders are just stacking their players, or stacking their team of players that were really good in the AAF, which only took place a year ago, so we actually have some data points to show that these guys are going to be pretty dominant. Again, I think that Rashad Ross was arguably the best receiver in the AAF, not just from a stat perspective, but just from a talent perspective. He was continually on the highlight reel last year, and even played really well for the Redskins the last time he had a chance. So the only question mark here is why was he traded, but overall I think it was just a scheme fit here, and I think that Rashad Ross will fit very nicely in with DC. He's my top rated wide receiver, and I think that he's worth a first round pick. They also have Eli Rogers, who previously played for the Steelers. He was set up to be the number 1 in this offense alongside Trey McBride, but once they acquired Ross, you got to make room for the new alpha in town. So I think that Eli Rogers will be, still a very highly owned fantasy asset and someone to pay attention to, but I don't think that he's going to be nearly as valuable as Rashad Ross. I do think he'll be a PPR asset, will probably get a decent amount of targets each week to keep his floor high, but overall I would rather have Rashad Ross than Eli Rogers. And then they also even have a good third string a good third option as a wide receiver. DeAndre Tompkins is really good on kick returns, and that's definitely going to be relevant in this league, considering the rule changes to the punt and the kick returns should be a lot more kick return touchdowns. So if your league awards touchdowns for kick returns, which I think it should, DeAndre Tompkins will be great. DeAndre Tompkins, will be very good in this league and would see a huge uptick in volume if either Ross or Eli Rogers gets hurt with injury. And then lastly, we look at the tight end. So Kari Lee here, in an already stacked offensive team, I think the only fault that you can really throw at Kari Lee is the fact that he's already playing in an offense that has a tremendous amount of talent, so it might be hard for him to carry week by week consistency. However, Kari Lee is really a wide receiver in a tight end's body. He's very quick, and honestly he looks and plays more like a wide receiver than your typical tight end. So I think he'll continue to see volume, and he'll probably be used in the red zone some to make him one of the more valuable tight ends, but the only reason why he's not one of the elite tier of tight ends is just because he would need some other players on the offense to either underperform or get hurt before he actually had the volume to be up there in the upper echelon of tight ends. But anyway, again, I just want to remind you guys, if you are playing XFL Fantasy Football this year, download my rankings. Again, the link is in the description, or you can go to fantasyaddictionnetwork.com to download those. I'll be uploading those all season or all off season long, getting you guys ready for your fantasy drafts. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and we will see you in the next one.